Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast. Today's episode is on launching young adult children with intention, grace, and presence, and letting go with love. It's another of our episodes on parenting with presence, and there are many more before this on parenting with presence if you would love to check them out. Today, we're going to talk specifically about embracing transitions and launching young adult children. But these same concepts, transitioning and embracing transitions and launching, happen to all of us at different points in our lives and careers. And so knowing that many of these concepts apply even if you don't have children, launching or transitioning to life outside your home in this moment. The intention of today's episode is to introduce the idea of transitioning well in relationships. Life and relationships with children in particular are actually almost all about transitions. Childhood and growing up is about transitions. And all of them are about letting go with love and infusing independence and growth and nurturing and nourishing without fixing and controlling. Our children and we are all always evolving and growing. We hope that you will discover in this episode a few strategies. The concept of seasons of parenting, the idea that the road of parenting and the parent-child relationship is long, much longer than 18 years, and remembering that everything is temporary. Our goal in parenting is building lifelong relationships with future adults with whom we hope to have further lifelong relationships. The takeaways of today's episode are threefold. The power of choosing an intention and showing up with love, grace, and presence. Choosing to show up with love, not fear, and abundance and not scarcity. And the idea that when you transition well, you end up where you want to be in relationships or otherwise. So this session was inspired by the current state of affairs in my life. And my expertise in sharing today's episode as a solo cast, I might add, comes from the fact that I am both a certified coach and I do a lot of coaching on transitions in career and in marriage and parenting and in life. I also am trained in mindfulness, and we're going to infuse a lot of mindfulness into the session today. And as many of you know, I am a pediatrician. Nothing I will say today is medical advice. It comes more from my parenting and human and coaching experiences. But my best qualification for this episode is that I am the mom of three sons, two of whom have launched. One is yet to launch, still in high school, but getting close. And I have launched my kiddos many times. In that kids launch when they go from high school to college. They launch when they go from college to the world. They often launch at other different times in different places. And so I've been at this launching business probably since about 2014. And I continue to be practicing and continue to be pausing and being present and experiencing it all, even the unexpected. And so I wanted to reflect on a few of the thoughts from my own children about launching and what they found helpful as we begin this podcast. And so, my own children, when I asked them what they thought about how I had done with their launching, were generally that I had done a good job, which was fabulous to hear. But what was good, I thought was interesting. So they very much appreciated the independence. They very much appreciated being asked and being expected to do things on their own and figure it out on their own. They enjoyed having me and us help them move into their college rooms, for example, but they then wanted to leave and they didn't want to have to report in, and they wanted to be able to figure out and set things up and organize things on their own. They appreciated the trust and the trust that it would all work out in the end. They also appreciated the high expectations, which is interesting because high expectations can go both ways. But when you have high expectations and you firmly believe in your children, they actually also borrow that belief and believe in themselves. And so rather than jumping in and fixing and controlling, showing up with high expectations and knowing that your children are going to turn out well, believing it more than they believe it, is actually a gift that you can give them. I also had the expectation that my children would graduate in 4 years and that they would have jobs while they were in college and they would have jobs while they were in high school. And interestingly, those were things that they actually thanked me for in the end. So I like to see it as I trusted that I had done my job as a parent. And when I dropped them off in college, they would figure it out. I was there in case they fell or there for consults, but not necessarily there to manage. That the relationship from this point forward was going to be about respect and trust. And that when you show up respecting and trusting and connecting, that's what's in your control. And your kids will choose to show up in their own way, hopefully mirroring respect, trust, and connection as well. So this session was initially shared as a live group coaching session. And I'm going to share many of my comments there, but this is for those of you that prefer to listen rather than watch and who want more of the Cliff Notes consolidated version without any of the live coaching, though I think I'll infuse a few of the comments that came from that session. And if you're interested in watching the session, you can find that session on YouTube. And it does include a bit about what coaching in these scenarios look like and how coaching can help. For this podcast, I just want to talk a bit about parent coaching. And one of the reasons that I infuse mindfulness into parent coaching is that mindfulness is synergistic with coaching. And so when we approach parenting mindfully and we add in coaching, which is the intention, it's the ideal recipe for success. Our children want us to be mindful. They want us to be thoughtful. They want us to pause and to be present. And they want us to be intentional. And when you blend those two things together, it gets us out of the very common, typical parenting challenge, which is reacting rather than responding. So many of us feel like as a parent, we're either playing zone defense or man to man, or we're being a ping pong ball. And we perhaps yell at our children when they react rather than choosing a response. And so what I offer in coaching is that when we're mindful and we're not stressed, we're much more able to be intentional and choose a intentional response. I also want to add that in my mind, mindful parents are actually better parents. And one of the things that I learned in yoga teacher training to teach kids yoga is that one of the best things parents can do is learn to meditate. Because when we show up mindfully, we model that for our children the whole way along. And so their model of a good parent is someone who pauses and is present and chooses that response. The space between the stimulus and the response is where your control and power are. And by modeling that and teaching our own children the value of mindfulness, we give them an incredible gift. So I also like to think of parenting again as ongoing transitions and essentially change management. And so when you think about it that way, there's less of the emotional charge in each space. You're adapting to change, they're adapting to change, you're adapting to change in the times. And so it gives you a lot more flexibility and perhaps a hands wide open approach to respond to whatever's happening with grace and presence and love rather than reacting. So I wanted to begin our discussion of this also with a background once again about how high achievers think, because coaching again is unlearning and learning to step out of these habitual thought patterns that we all have. And so many of us who are high achievers have high expectations. And just knowing that you're coming in with the high expectations, noticing without judgment, but realizing how do you want to bring those to this situation? We also tend to very much dislike uncertainty or desire certainty. And so in transitions, that's going to be a big issue. In launching, that's going to be a big issue. And so just realizing that we are coming to it with a dislike of uncertainty without judgment, but just noticing can be an incredibly powerful tool. Most high achievers, especially those in healthcare who are many of our listeners, love to be in control. We love to fix and we love to plan. We also like to plan for the worst, prepare for the worst. And so we are very worried and anxious and trying to solve for all the things that haven't happened yet. This comes up a lot in the launching situation. We tend to think there's a right and wrong way to do it and a black or white. And if we just learned more, knew more, figured out more, read more, we would know the answer. We also tend to fear mistakes for ourselves and our children. We tend to be uncomfortable with vulnerability. We tend to have a scarcity mindset, noticing what's missing rather than what's working. We tend to not like discomfort. We treat discomfort as a problem. And we also tend to have a very high level of urgency. If you haven't read my blog, there's a recent blog on something called the urgency tax. And when we show up with an inappropriate level of urgency or an inappropriate assessment of the urgency of a situation, it's actually incredibly costly in terms of our own ability to be present, to be loving, to connect, and to show up with intention. And so one of the things that I think is really powerful in both the launching situation and generally just parenting with presence is to remember that, is it actually urgent? Ask yourself that question. And that may really buy you some more presence and grace and energy and time to breathe. So the other thing I wanted to reflect on here is what mindfulness is and how mindfulness can add into both your parenting and your launching. So mindfulness is presence. It's pausing and noticing, as I mentioned above, without judgment. It's also showing up with curiosity. It's showing up non-striving. Many of us as parents show up striving with agendas and goals and things that we very much want for our children. And so showing up non-striving is quite an improvement in our relationships and the way we approach this situation. Patience is also part of one of the main tenets of mindfulness, and I think is really relevant here, as is gratitude. So we can bring all of these sort of negative habitual thought patterns that maybe don't help us in this situation, but have been very helpful along the way, and shift some of them. But the other thing that we all bring to the parenting and launching situation is love. And so I like to go back to one of my infamous questions, which is, what would love do? And it applies here very, very well. So in my mind, love would ask, how do you want to show up for launching with love? Love would be curious. It would show up with wonder and abundance rather than catastrophizing and scarcity. Love would also focus on what's in your control, which is you. It would focus on how you show up, what you do, what you say, and the tone and energy with which you do that. It would focus on how you think and how you feel and choose those with intention. And so love would see that the grace and presence and showing up that way is about you. Now, in the live coaching session I did, it may not be possible to show up with total grace and presence, but maybe you just want to show up with more grace and presence. Realizing that this isn't about perfectionism. Mindfulness is a practice. Parenting is a practice. Our kids are practicing launching. And so it's really the intention setting for grace and presence that's within your control and showing up with love. Love would also ask what your future self would wish you had done. When it's all worked out, how will you wish you had showed up for this? And then try to do that. So the other thing that I think that love would do is set a specific intention. As I mentioned above, it might be love, it might be grace, it might be presence. So what an intention is an aspiration or a wish. It's setting your GPS so you don't end up wherever. When you set an intention, you give your mind a direction. Without a direction, our brain tends to go to the negative, to catastrophizing, the what ifs, to scarcity mindset. That's its natural default thought. And so when we set our GPS towards something else, something that we desire, love, connection, respect, trust, we end up with a directionality, and our brain doesn't go to those default thoughts that cause us pain and more anxiety and disconnection. So I also like to think about intentions, and we have had many podcasts on the Mindful Healers podcast talking about intentions as opposed to goals and the power of intentions. And so please take a listen to some of those if you're interested in why intention setting can be so valuable and transformative, honestly, in a life. If you want to get somewhere in the way that you want and you want to end up somewhere specifically, intentions are the way there. But I like to think of intentions as feelings. So it's how you're going to be, how you're going to feel when you get there. And you can ask some very specific questions. What energy do you want to show up for this launching process with? Who do you want to be in the relationship through the launching process and then perhaps beyond? What do you want to model for your children or teenagers or young adults? I would advocate that you actually model things that sometimes we think we might not want to model, but modeling vulnerability, modeling allowing our own feelings, modeling accepting messiness, accepting lots of feelings, accepting emotion, accepting anxiety, and figuring out how to problem solve. So when we model problem solving, that's what our children learn. We don't have to show up beautifully composed, having it all figured out. Our children will learn much more from us if we show up messy. I also advocate showing up, as I mentioned earlier, trusting, respecting, and connecting. So those of you familiar with coaching will remember the manual. And the manual is essentially how we think someone else should show up. And so if we want our children to show up, trusting, respecting, and connecting, we have to show up, trusting, respecting, and connecting. And so how can you trust them as you launch them? How can you trust that you did a good job and that they will figure it out? If you want them to respect you in the process, respect them, respect their decision making, respect their way of handling it, respect the kind of human that they are. They may be very different than you and going to approach the college situation very differently than you. And it might work out even better than you thought. If you want connection, connect with them. We make often the way that they connect with us mean something, and yet it likely doesn't. The way they connect has to do with them, and the way you connect has to do with you. And so connect in a way that works for you. Call, reach out, text, send subliminal messages, realizing that we can feel connected really because of how we think and feel about it. And so a child who doesn't communicate much generally may not communicate much from college or wherever they've moved on to, and just allowing that their way of communication is not about you, it's about them. And so sometimes stepping back and giving them the chance to step in can be super powerful. And on that note, just reflecting on my own experience, my middle son has actually now graduated from college and moved to New York City. And he went to college at UC Berkeley near me. And while he was there, he did not connect much. We had an agreement that because UC Berkeley is close to where I live, that we would give him space. And even that space wasn't perhaps enough for him to be ready to step in and reach back. Now that he's moved to New York City, he texts and calls and reaches out 10 times more practically every day, when before I wouldn't hear from him for a month or two. And so I think realizing that our children know what they need and potentially giving them appropriate space is a really valuable opportunity for them, and valuable for us to see what happens when we do. When they do call a month in and they're doing great, isn't that amazing that you've raised a child who's doing great, who wanted to be independent enough and was busy enough and distracted enough and interested in what they were doing that they wouldn't call you? Many of us make it think that they don't care or they don't respect us or they don't value the relationship. It's very much not likely about that. And so tell a story about that serves you and feels good, because why not? So the next offering that I would make here is to clean up your own clutter. And love would definitely clean up your own clutter. And so the clutter, the mental clutter, is all of those negative thought patterns that I mentioned earlier on. And so it would let go of the scarcity mindset. It would let go of the catastrophizing, the negativity bias, the urgency, and it would notice them and clean it up. It would operate from love, not from fear. It would operate from abundance, not from scarcity. It would show up with hope and possibility. It would notice all these default thoughts, knowing their default thoughts. They don't have to go away, but we can choose which of them we want to embrace and take on at different points in time, knowing that they've helped us at some times and don't help us at other times. And then we can move forward with intention. So, a couple of things that I mentioned in the very beginning that I wanted to circle back to here is this idea of seasons of parenting. Parenting is a long, long, long game. We are parents of infants and toddlers. We are parents of teenagers. We are parents of young adults. We are parents of married people. We are parents of single people. Um, you probably have a relationship with your own parents right now. So, this parent child relationship is long and interesting, and there are seasons. There's no scarcity to it, there's no urgency to it. And when we relax in, that's where we get the presence and the grace. Parenting is also a long game. And so realizing again, there's no rush. Our job is to raise responsible adults when they are under 18, and then to have a loving relationship when they are over 18, to be there to support one another, to respect and trust and enjoy one another. So if our job as parents is to guide and advise them and perhaps keep them as safe as possible, love them for who they are, then this launching becomes a little bit easier. Our job is not to make sure that it all works out okay, that there are no bumps, that they don't have any mistakes or failures. Our job is to love them, to guide them, to share our knowledge with them, and to enjoy them. The other key strategy is to remember that this is their journey. It's not our journey, and it's their journey. And really, what we can send is good wishes for the journey, but it's not ours to control, manage, or fix. Now, it is true that in many cases, parents are paying for it, but realizing that that is a choice and it's a choice you're making. And so you can set some expectations. You certainly can have boundaries, but also realizing that that's a choice that you're making, and there's no obligation to do so, and there's no obligation for them to go and do what you want. And so taking out that obligation can really change the energy. Pivoting now to what would grace do? And grace would allow and validate all the feelings on all sides. This launching business is messy, particularly this time, which is probably my fourth or fifth launch in life of a child. I was much more impacted emotionally than I thought I would be. I was taken by surprise by my emotions and realizing that all the feelings that you have, whether they're grief, sadness, fear, overwhelm, excitement, perhaps you're thrilled, perhaps you're sad and excited all at the same time. All of those feelings are welcome. You might be anxious or worried, and that's fine too. Your child, young adult, might be anxious. They might be stressed. They might be afraid. They might be excited. All of those things are welcome. So, even thinking about how they are just like you can be very helpful. And sharing your vulnerabilities and sharing your emotions and not trying to overmanage them. It is fine to be sad. It does not need to be fixed. It is fine to be anxious. It's normal in this situation. So I think oftentimes we come to the situation with all these emotions and we want to fix them and change them. And that does not help. And so we want connection. Allow them, connect over the emotions, connect over the tears, connect over the mess. And know that really in the end, you want to have a healthy relationship with your child who is going to be an adult if they are not already. And so allowing all these emotions and teaching them to allow them and not over managing them can be really powerful. So again, I like to think of it as this elegant vulnerability. Where you're vulnerable doesn't mean you're a hot mess. It just means you share how you are managing your emotions, and you're teaching them how to manage their own emotions in a not overly managed, overly repressed way. The other recommendation about what grace would do would be to step back so they can step in, something I've mentioned before. But giving them space, letting them grow like gardens. Their garden is going to be weedy, it's going to be overgrown, it's going to thrive, it may have a water shortage at some point. They're meant to have mistakes. It's meant to be messy. And actually, this is the time where mistakes and loneliness and figuring it out and messing up with friends is all part of the game. It is not our job to go through and snowplow. It's our job to be there to support when they need us. It's our job to be curious, and it's our job to show up with love. So I think when we can step back so they can step in, it's tremendously graceful and impactful. We can also be graceful by showing up with abundance. How is this an amazing opportunity? What are all the amazing possibilities? Is it possible that the best is still to come rather than the best has already come? Asking good questions is a very abundant approach. Why is this college experience going to be amazing? If you have a child who you're particularly worried about, why is this going to be the perfect thing for them? If it's not, it'll always sort itself out in the end. But what is going well? What is the gain in this other than the loss? Because you can see, for example, an empty nest could be amazing or it could be sad. And so choosing your thoughts and choosing your stories about it wisely. The other thing is to celebrate this. This is an accomplishment. This is exciting. Better that they're going to college than not. Anticipating the joy, anticipating the sadness, anticipating all the feelings is beautiful. That's what life is. And so rather than thinking that there's a problem or something to be fixed, just enjoy the bumpiness of the roller coaster ride or the rough seas in these moments and realize that that's what makes life interesting. So I wanted to end with this thought of transitioning well, and that all of childhood is a transition, and going to college or launching your child off into the world, into a new city, is yet another transition. It's a season, one season has ended, you're transitioning to the next season. The key to getting to the season that you want and maintaining this close relationship and being graceful and present is to focus on the transition itself, to move slowly, to relax in, to accommodate and adapt along the way. We often blow through the transitions trying to get to the goal. And so realizing that the launch itself is a transition, and then wherever they're launching to is a transition to the next thing. It's all a transition. So when there's no end game, the goal is really to be graceful and present and show up with love in the moment, allowing yourself to be in it, the mud and the mess and all. So hopefully that had some nuggets for you in it. I would love to work with any of you as a coach. I do a lot of one-on-one parent coaching for parents who just want to show up with more grace, humor, curiosity, who want to have more connection, who perhaps want to enjoy parenting in a different way than they have so far, and or perhaps parent differently than their own parents parented them. Maybe they want to bring in some creativity and to enjoy the experience rather than be worried and controlling and managing and fixing. So I also offer a small group parenting program called Parent with Presence. It's going to restart September 21st. It will meet twice a month for 3 months. And I like to space out the sessions in these programs to give you a chance to integrate and practice. It's not, again, about the goal. It's about the experience and enjoying the process of parenting and enjoying being a parent and enjoying your child. And so I very much like to keep my group small for the intimacy and the connection and the sharing and the learning from one another. And then to bring in spaciousness between the sessions for you to practice and explore some of these tools. So if you have found either this podcast helpful, or any of my previous podcasts on parenting with presence, I would love to have you join. And even if your child is leaving, I want to add in that the most important part of parenting is probably what happens when they leave. And now the relationship becomes volitional and voluntary. And what you want is a beautiful relationship with your young adults, the parents of your grandchildren. You want a beautiful relationship with whoever they choose to partner up with. And so this might be the absolute most important time to focus on your parenting and show up with grace, presence, and love. So the link to register for that is in the show notes. I also encourage you to head to my website, www.jessiemahonymd.com, and head to the resources page and click on the blogs. And I would sign up to have my blog posts come in your email. I write about parenting all the time in my blog posts. I also write about everything because I don't believe that you can separate out parenting from your life. If your work is not going well, your parenting doesn't go well. If your marriage is not going well, your parenting doesn't go well. If your health is not going well, your parenting doesn't go well, and vice versa. So, one of the reasons that I am a general life coach is that I don't believe that any of these things are inseparable. And if you join me for coaching, you will notice how your people pleasing shows up in your parenting, it shows up in your marriage, it shows up in your work. And that when you learn these tools in any area that you feel drawn to work on, they serve you well in all of them. And your relationships benefit, your work benefits, your patients benefits, your colleagues benefit, your coworkers benefit, no matter what area, industry you work in, and no matter the type of relationship or the age of your children. So I would love to have any of you join me for Parent with Presence or one-on-one coaching. And next year in January, I will be reopening Transition Well and would love to have any of you join me there for a group that really focuses on the tools around transitions. So as we end, I invite you to choose an intention for your parenting this fall. What would you like it to look like? I invite you to ask, what would love do as a parent for your children this fall and for yourself as a parent? How would love approach launching your children? What would it look like if you had compassion for yourself in the process? What might it look like if you accepted and allowed and validated all of the feelings on all sides? What would it look like if you showed up with grace and presence? Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us some stars and reviews. And most of all, please share it with those in your world who you think might enjoy it. We offer these podcasts as a labor of love. And what we would most love is if they reached more people. And for me personally, I would most love if they changed more children's lives and families' lives and doctors' lives and humans' lives, knowing that the world needs some change and needs everyone to live happier and healthier life. We share this podcast weekly, hoping to spread mindful wisdom to improve and help you all enjoy a life better lived. Stay on after the sound of the singing bowl for a mindful moment offering. May you all be well. May you all be safe. And may you all launch your children, whether it be to kindergarten, high school, or college, with grace, presence, and love. Welcome to today's mindful moment. Today, I wanted to reflect on the idea of a long game. So I invite you to find a comfortable seat wherever you are, or pause if you're walking, and just take in a long, nourishing, cleansing breath, enjoying the length and fullness of it. Let it out through your mouth long and slow. Take 2 more long, deep inhales. And equally matched, long, nourishing exhales. Breathe in the abundance of oxygen, hope, love, and breathe out the scarcity, the fear, the anxiety, the stress. And just take a moment and notice how you feel. If it's comfortable for you, close your eyes. And if not, you can leave them open. If you're driving, please do not close your eyes. Bring a hand to heart and the other hand to top, checking in with your heart space. Checking in with you and how you feel in this moment. If you are about to launch kids, send yourself some grace. Give yourself a little moment of presence and send yourself some love. Consider the possibility of embracing the moment and the transition and embracing all of the emotions that come with it. And take in an inhale and an exhale. And as you sit and reflect for a moment, sitting gracefully in presence and lovingly, remembering that as parents, we are building lifelong relationships with future adults. The rest of our relationship, whatever is to come, is more than likely way longer than the relationship that we have had so far. Our job as parents is to love, it's to guide, it's to advise, and to keep them as safe as possible, knowing that even that is out of our control. Our job is to love and love them exactly as they are. And our job is to remember that both we and them are imperfect humans. Remembering that all that's in our control is not to be perfect, but to show up with our best intention that we can in the moment. We can consider showing up, pausing, and being present. We can breathe deeply. We can pay attention. We can accept and allow and validate. We can show up with grace and presence and love and compassion for ourselves and for them. And we can remember that we are all imperfect and a work in progress. And that for most of our children, their amygdala is still developing. So whatever is happening today, wherever you find yourself today, that amygdala is not yet fully formed, and it will likely look different soon. Even if the amygdala is fully formed, we are all still always growing and evolving and changing. And so showing up for ourselves and for our children with our hands wide open to the experience, all the good, all the bad, all the love, all the frustration, all the worry. Showing up with presence, grace, and love is an option. Taking a long, deep inhale once again, and an exhale, letting it out. And a pause here just to relax and notice how you feel. Remembering that your breath is always available to you. And along this launching process, if you find yourself stressed or tight, just remembering to breathe, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And a reminder that it just might all turn out way better than you expect. When you're ready, you can lower your hands and open your eyes. Thank you all so much for joining me for this podcast and for practicing mindfulness with me. I hope to see you all for Parent with Presence and or on the next episode of the Mindful Healers podcast. Thanks for listening.